Supervisor. We have a very interesting program today. We're going to talk about an organization that has really changed people's lives for the better. My guest is Suzanne Lester, and we're going to talk about how the Coalition for Family Justice has made a positive impact in her life. That organization provides victims and children involved in domestic violence situations with crisis intervention, information, support, legal access, and advocacy. The organization was founded by Monica Getz in 1988 and is headquartered in Irvington in Westchester County. So, Suzanne, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
Maybe we could start the program by you telling us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, Paul. I'm Suzanne Lester. I live in Ardsley, New York, and I've lived there for over 40 years. I am on the board of the Coalition for Family Justice, and I've been on the board for about 20 years. I got involved, thank God, through you. I was driving around, ready to pull my hair out, didn't know who to turn to. I was in court fighting for custody, fighting for the lien to be released against my house so I could borrow money to send my daughters to college because they were of college age, and I didn't know who to turn to. And I called you up on a rainy Friday night in the early 90s, I think it was, and you said, come on into my office, which surprised me, but I did. And you said, I'm going to call in one of my chips, and you called Monica Getz. And Monica Getz said, I'll be happy to help, Paul, but I have the New York Times camped out on my lawn. Please have Suzanne call me before she goes to work in the morning. What time does she go to work? And I said, 6 o'clock. And she said, fine, have her call me at 6. I thought this woman's never going to pick up the phone at 6 a.m., but she did. She talked to me. She listened. She decided to go to court with me. She advocated for me. And within 3 weeks, the lien was released on the house so I could pay for my daughter's college. I could pay for my youngest one's therapy because she was very disturbed about the divorce. And I could have the house outright. So thank God to you and thank God for Monica Getz. And as a result, I believe in paying it forward. And I've stayed involved in this organization, which is a godsend to so many men and women, to help them not have to be subjected again to more abuse by the court system, by the legal system, after they've been subjected to the abuse from their spouses. So
that is amazing. And I should mention, when you mentioned that, I called him like a favor. Actually, with Monica, she helps everyone.
Yes.
So over the years, I've referred so many people to her, and everyone has been a success story that I've referred to because she really gives everybody personal attention. And, there was one woman a couple of years before, I helped you. I was a county legislator. She walked into my office. She was I'll remember, she was almost suicidal. And she was talking about going over the Tappan Zee Bridge and jumping. And I called Monica. Monica helped her. And the woman later became a reporter for a major New York City newspaper. And her life was changed also forever in a positive way. Could you tell us where how to get in touch with the Coalition for Family Justice?
Okay, the Coalition phone number is 914-591-5753. It'll usually be picked up by Monica's assistant, Renee, and you'll be guided to come to the next coalition meeting, which is now being held through Zoom. I don't know whether we're going to go back to regular meetings now that the pandemic numbers are so low, which may happen, but right now it's still Zoom. or you can go online to the Coalition for Family Justice and see the listings and the dates for the meetings. But you're best off calling that number, and you can get when the next meeting is.
And the Coalition for Family Justice, what's their phone number?
It's 914-591-5753.
We have to take a 5-minute break in a couple seconds, and we'll be back with Suzanne Lester, who is going to tell you about an amazing organization that exists in Irvington. It's called the Coalition for Family Justice, and if you are a victim or a family member of someone who is involved in domestic violence or abuse, this is a group for you.
Now, back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
In Westchester, I'm Paul Feiner. I'm the Greenburgh Town Supervisor. And this program actually could save lives, because I bet you there's a lot of people in Westchester who are victims of domestic violence. They need crisis intervention. They need information. They need support. They need legal advocacy and access, and they just don't know what to do. I remember, Suzanne, when you first met me to discuss your situation, you were hopeless at that point.
Yes, absolutely.
And
hopeless.
you had no idea what to do. And then when you called Monica, she really changed your life for the better. So could you maybe again tell us the phone number in case listeners want to contact the coalition?
Absolutely. The phone number for the Coalition for Family Justice is 914-591-5753. Renee usually mans the phone Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings from 9 to 1 p.m.
And do you have, if somebody needs the assistance of the coalition, how expensive is it to get help?
Okay, there is a donation that's expected to be donated somewhere between $35 and $50 for the year.
Oh, $35,000?
No, $35.
Okay.
To $50 for the year. You get to come in once a month. You get the help of pro bono of lawyers and Monica and other members that have been through the courts, such as myself. There's other people there, and you get to hear them on Zoom now. I remember when I used to go to court or go to the meetings, I used to share with people how helpful Monica was and how helpful the lawyers were and the coalition was. And you learn little tricks of the trade and how to present yourself and how not to get yourself upset to the point where you want to kill yourself, because parents losing their children and being subjected to that kind of domestic violence is terrible. A lot of the lawyers, one case, I took a woman to court. I was a court watcher. The coalition had a program called Court Watching, where we would go with a member. Each member would take turns going with other members, the more experienced ones, so they didn't feel so alone in the courthouse. And I ended up taking one woman to court. She was fighting for custody of her son. The judge, even the judge, nor the lawyers understood that the child was learning disabled and didn't even have what's called an IEP in education, an individual educational plan, which needed to be constructed for this kid to be successful. The father didn't care. He just wanted custody. He didn't know that that's what was necessary. The mother was busy fighting for this. So, I mean, it could have been a mother. It could have been a father. In this case, it was the mother. And we were able to convince the judge that the school district that the child was in, I believe it was either Mount Vernon or New Rochelle at the time, was responsible for creating a specific individual educational plan for this child, and the child ended up thriving.
That is amazing. if somebody uses the Coalition for Family Justice, do they still need to hire a personal lawyer, to help them with their individual cases?
Well, I would say that a lawyer would be very helpful, but not in every case. The most important thing that the coalition does that I love, Paul, is they make sure that you get to pay for your own child to go to college, not the lawyer's child to go to college. I mean, if you end up paying a lawyer $15,000-$20,000 and then they don't even fix the problem, which happens many times in our system, because the legal system can be the second abuse that these people go through, then how are you going to have enough money to put your own child through college?
So basically, even if somebody has a lawyer, their own lawyer, the coalition could do a lot of the legwork, give a lot of advice. So this way, your personal out-of-pocket costs are much less, because sometimes you could go to a lawyer for consultation. If you say hello, it's already $1,000.
Exactly. Now, I had a lawyer who really didn't understand my situation, even though she was a great lawyer and ended up becoming a judge. Her name was Doris Friedman. I don't know whether
Right, I remember she was a town judge.
She was a town judge in Greenburgh. And Monica realized right away that she really didn't understand my particular situation. Because I was working, Doris assumed that I had my own insurance, my own health insurance, which I didn't. It was all based on my husband's. So when he decided to cut me out, I had no insurance, even though I was working.
So one of the things that the coalition really does is they'll help you direct the right. They'll get your lawyers to focus on what is really necessary,
Exactly,
rather than spend all this time analyzing things that are totally irrelevant.
Correct. And the other thing they do is they teach you with important facts that you need to know. For instance, in the court system, there's a concept called the stipulation. And a lot of members were signing court stipulations, not realizing that once they signed a stipulation, you can't go back. It's virtually impossible to change anything. And the richer or wealthier partner's lawyer would try to get what was in that partner's best interest into a stipulation to end up undermining the other partner. And once that was done, whether it was custody or child support or health benefits, it was virtually almost impossible to turn it around. So Monica would intervene, look at the agreement at the Sunday meetings and say, you cannot sign this. This is not in your best interest.
We have to take a break, and we'll be back in 3 minutes. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor. And could you tell us the phone number of the coalition?
It's 914-591-5753.
Thank you. We'll be right back. I'm Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
WVOX. Now back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, Westchester. This is a really interesting program, and I bet you that people who listen to this program, there's some people whose lives will be changed for the better as a result of the information we're providing, because there's families all over Westchester that are being victimized by domestic violence situations. They may need crisis intervention. They may need information. They may need support, legal access, and advocacy. They just don't know where to go. And if they knew that all they have to do is give a donation of, you said $50?
That's, yeah.
A suggested donation, $50 a year, they could get all this free legal advice, support, help, it really will change people's lives, for the better. Because sometimes when people are going through divorces, they're spending thousands and thousands of dollars on lawyers. They're wasting a lot of money because they're not focusing on the help that they really need.
Correct.
And the Coalition for Family Justice could provide them with the support. And I think that one of the advantages of the Coalition for Family Justice is it's a support group.
Yes.
And some misery likes company. And I think that, let me ask you a question. Has it been helpful when people see that they're not alone?
Oh, it's very helpful, which is why I heard from Monica that there were occasions where people would go to court with other people. They were called court watchers, and they would wear big buttons that says Coalition for Family Court Watchers. Even the judges would sit up straight when they saw somebody from the coalition in the back of the courtroom because they realized they were being watched. So if you had a judge that was more or less tuned into his own philosophy and not really listening to what's going on, all of a sudden he started listening, or she started listening to what was really going on and was sensitive to what was happening. And at the same time, in the room at the coalition, we not only had lawyers helping people, we had forensic accountants going over the spouse's income. We had not just forensic accountants, but social workers that were here to help people emotionally, because some people who weren't drug addicts before the divorce all of a sudden started abusing alcohol and drugs because they couldn't get through the process. It's not like it happens on Law and Order, Paul. It doesn't just happen in a week or 2 weeks or even a month. Sometimes the court dates are set a month or two ahead, and people are dealing with this anxiety and having to hold on to this anxiety for months and months. Or if people lose custody of their children, they're terribly bereft. They need that support, the social workers. And then we need the court watchers to go to court with people and show that the coalition is there and the judge notice.
Now, when most people think of the domestic violence, I think the only people who would benefit are women. Are there men who are members of the coalition?
Yes, there are men who are members of the coalition. There was one situation where the man's wife was a cocaine addict and very wealthy, and she was spending a lot of the money on her drugs, and she was also had enough money to pay a very high-powered lawyer to win custody. In the meantime, here's this drug addict getting money from her parents to win custody of her children, and the husband, who was a really good father, was denied access. And that's a horrible situation. So the coalition steps in and goes about trying to show the court that this is a reversal of justice. This is a travesty of justice, that the mother who's the drug addict is the one that got custody rather than the father.
I know that Monica has been critical of some of the judges,
Yes.
in the past. And could you tell us a little bit about the efforts to have better judges and what some of the problems are?
Yes. One of the problems that was going on was the judges that were not keen on hearing the misery of the litigants would pull the lawyers into the back room and tell the lawyers, this is what you're going to do, and you're going to go in there and you're going to tell your clients that this is what they're going to adhere to, and you're going to have your clients sign the stipulation. Monica made sure that she contacted the administrative judge to let the judges know that that shouldn't be what's going on. The litigants should be party to what decisions are being made and be able to fight for the right not to sign a stipulation that's not in their best interest. So that was one thing that Monica did by contacting the late Judge Kay, who was the administrative judge for this area. The other thing that she did was by having the court watchers in the courtroom, the judges became more willing to hear what was going on.
Most of the judges in Westchester right now, judges that we could have confidence in, or are there still problem ones?
I wouldn't say problem ones. There's certain judges that aren't educated yet. Most of the ones, Monica holds a judicial forum in the November of election years when judges are running for office. It's very important that the public come to those meetings, and I personally usually make sure that the notice appears in the Enterprise and the Reporter-Dispatch and gets noticed on the radio, so more members will show up to ask their questions at the judicial forum.
Because that highlights to the judges the importance of the Sunday after they're in. They may remember.
The other thing that Monica did was she showed a movie of a family that was taken away from their mother in New York, and the mother ended up, because the father was so abusive, sexually abusive of the children also, that she ended up kidnapping her own children and taking them to Holland. And she ended up showing a video of the children being interviewed, talking about how abused they were by this man, and then bringing it back and showing it to the judges at the judicial forum before the members were asking questions of the judges. The judges had to sit through this video. So it sensitized them to the fact that things aren't always the way they appear. You know, the powerful person in the marriage, sometimes the one wreaking havoc, the one that's controlling, the one that's abusive, is also the one that's better at manipulating the courts, Paul. So if they can manipulate the court into believing that they're the better parent, then the child suffers. So Monica was intent on showing the courts and the judges that this is what happens.
When people think of crimes or violence, they usually think, this is something that impacts people who are on the lower income spectrum. Does domestic violence, are there people who are abusers who are, say from wealthier neighborhoods?
Paul, you hit the nail on the head. I mean,
that was a leading question.
Particularly in Westchester, where you have the heads of major Fortune 500 companies. You had heads of companies that were golfing with the judges, that were able to kind of manipulate the situation, even though they were the abusers. And this was going on over and over and over again. This was the milieu that Monica had to change.
So what Monica has done, is there may be somebody who's very high-powered and held in a high esteem, gets a lot of
by
positive media
right.
attention, shows up, is supposedly very philanthropic.
Correct.
And then when he's home, he could be abusing his wife.
Correct. Or the children. Or both.
Right. And he has friends who are judges, may contribute money to
their
candidates.
Campaigns.
And so it's really difficult.
I had a situation where, and I won't mention names in this case, where a husband was a police officer. He retired from a police force and making $85,000, and went to work for the FBI, making another $85,000. And he had a wife and a child that was learning disabled. The wife was working as a school secretary. They went into court. He had as his lawyer, and I won't mention names, somebody that was well connected with one of the women's shelters, where the women would go if they were the victim of domestic violence. What this very smart police officer and FBI agent did in wanting to secure his divorce without having to pay too much, because he was having an affair with his secretary, was he hired the person from the domestic violence shelter to be his lawyer. And so, of course, in conflict of interest, the person had to ask the woman to leave the shelter, even though she had no place to go. And that was a very tricky situation.
Wow, it's really amazing these stories. For people who are just tuning in, could you give us the phone number? Also, is there a website?
I believe there's, if you go to the Coalition for Family Justice, Monica Getz, you will be brought up on the dates of the meetings and the Zoom meetings. But I will repeat the number twice. It's so people have an opportunity to get it. It's 914 area code 591, that's Irvington, 5753. That's 914-591-5753, Paul.
Great, we have to take one more break, and we'll be back on Paul Feiner, Greenburgh Town Supervisor.
Now, back to the Greenburgh Report on 1460 WVOX. Once again, here's Greenburgh Town Supervisor Paul Feiner.
Good morning, Westchester. I'm Paul Feiner, and my guest is Suzanne Lester, and she's talking about a really fantastic organization. It's called the Coalition for Family Justice, and they provide victims and children involved in domestic violence situations with crisis intervention, information support, legal access, and advocacy. It's an organization based in Irvington, New York, and they generally ask for a donation of $50 a year, and that provides you with all the help.
But please don't think if you don't have the 50 for whatever reason that you shouldn't show up, because they don't expect it of you that day if you don't have it. They're not going to deny helping you if you don't have the $50.
Right. So you could. Right. They're hoping that you'll give, but it's not mandatory.
Correct.
And let me ask: the organization is based in Irvington. Does the coalition help people? Because I know that Monica has a national reputation.
Right.
So is it national in scope?
Yes. We have people that have showed up at that meeting from Virginia, from North Carolina, from California, from Ohio, from New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, all over the country. And what she does, I remember when there was a woman that showed up from California, she called a lawyer in California that was of the same mind as Monica, and asked her to help.
And now with Zoom, it's easier to be a national organization.
Exactly. And the members are from all over the country. We even had some people, like I said, from Holland, that this woman who happened to come to the United States moved back to Holland with her children. And Monica stayed involved with that family. And the children ended up, thank God, back with the mother, who was not the abuser, and it was nice. It was lovely to hear the story, and she had it on film. She had it videotaped.
Do you have any other anecdotes about people whose lives were really changed for the better?
There was one family, a woman whose children were taken away. I think it was North Carolina, and because of the help she got in the coalition room, which I guess would be the same as a Zoom room, she was able to advocate for herself. And because Monica provided emotional support to her, she was able to not end up killing herself. Because without her children, any mother and father knows what it would be like to not be able to be in touch with their children. There were women that showed up that were starting to use Prozac or other stronger drugs because the pain of missing their kids was terrible. There was another situation where there was a woman who was forced to have a get, and the husband took the children to Israel, and they were able to get the children back. And that was very involved, and I don't remember the details of that. But when you're at the coalition, you have a few different lawyers. You get different input from lawyers, from members, from Monica. The other aspect of this is quite often one of the people, and it's not necessarily the husband and it's not necessarily the wife, one of them is a drug abuser or an alcoholic, and that makes the divorce even uglier and harder and more painful for the parents and for the children. It's scarier because you don't know if you push the husband or the wife too far, whether they're going to end up hurting the children or not. So everything has to be very careful. What Monica provides with some of the lawyers at the coalition is intervention and mediation so that it doesn't have to be adversarial, because it's the adversarial nature of a court that sometimes freaks people out. And that's what creates a lot of hard feelings and bad feelings. And when Monica can intervene and do a mediation with a lawyer present, it usually ends up much better than if they were to go through the courts adversarially.
You mentioned earlier that at the meetings, usually there's 3 or 4 lawyers.
Right.
Are these lawyers who are donating their time, or are they paid?
They're donating the time for the meeting. If the members want to hire the lawyer to do extra services, they're welcome to do it. But the price of hiring one of those lawyers, because Monica checks and makes sure that the lawyers that show up at the meeting for pro bono work are not going to charge the members exorbitant fees. They're going to be fair. They're going to be the kind of fees that a member can pay, even if it's over time, without having to sign over their house to the lawyer to pay for the lawyer's kids' college.
So what would be, say, what would be affordable rates for something like this?
It all depends on the circumstance and what the person needs help with. But they're affordable, and Monica makes sure they stay affordable. If the person doesn't do it, I've seen Monica ask lawyers to leave. If the lawyer figured that they could get away with charging the members more to have a bigger clientele, Monica asks them to go. She does not want people like that at her meeting. And she doesn't feel it's positive or conducive to helping members. And she's very on top of that.
Which is really important, because sometimes people will say, "Oh, I want to do something pro bono. I'll give you some advice," and then it's real. They're really doing it because they want to get clients.
Correct, and they really want to do it so they can charge later on. And Monica makes sure that doesn't happen. There was one lawyer I liked an awful lot that was helping people at the beginning, and then all of a sudden his tune changed, and he started charging a little too much. Wanted somebody to sign over their house, and Monica made sure that didn't happen. So
that's great. You mentioned during the break that your organization has also worked with police chiefs. Can you tell us about that?
Yes. In the beginning, Monica held meetings with police officers and police chiefs to sensitize them to going into a home where there's a domestic violence issue. So she could bring up the fact that in most cases there was a drug or an alcohol-related issue so that the police could be sensitized to that. What Monica and I both learned is that many of these police officers were children of the parent that had been abused. So they're there to make sure that the abusers don't end up with the kids. But like I said before, it's usually the abuser that's the best manipulator, and it's a very tricky situation.
So generally, are most police departments, in your opinion, understanding of these issues? And
they're trying to be, but they don't see it as their job. And the restrictions and the legalities of their job make it difficult for them at times to function off their awareness what they already know. But the municipalities are becoming much more sensitive to these issues.
Is there like a legislative advocacy initiatives also where you're looking for new legislation?
Monica's always handling new initiatives for new legislation advocacies. When I first met her, she was working with a gentleman, I believe his name was Oliver Capel.
Right, I remember he was Attorney General.
He was Attorney General, and she was working with him to establish a no-fault divorce. Because if you remember, at the beginning, you had to have a fault. And then if somebody was found guilty of being at fault, then what did that mean? That they couldn't see their own children? So Monica wanted to make, and people would fight harder to make sure that they weren't the one at fault. So Monica was advocating for no-fault divorce in New York State. And I think Oliver Capel was the Attorney General then.
Right. So we're running out of time, and my guest has been Suzanne Lester of the Coalition for Family Justice, and it's based in Irvington. And again, one last time, if you could tell us the phone number.
I'll be happy to. It's very important. It's 914 area code 591-5753. That's 914-591-5753.
This is really great. I really appreciate you coming on.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
And
Paul.
I'm going to create a YouTube of the interview, and hopefully we'll share the information with a lot of people. Because, one of the problems in Westchester is that there's a lot of groups that do great things, and not everybody knows about it. And, there could be somebody who right now doesn't think they're going to need the services, and 6 months later, they may.
I have to say this. Thank goodness for you, because I didn't know about it. And what is it now? Almost 25 years ago that I came to you and you knew about Monica. You're a wealth of information. You know a lot of your resources. And it's great to have you in the position of supervisor knowing these things and sharing them with your community. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. I'll see everybody next week, and have a great week.